All right, sounds good. Thank you all for popping in. As of now, can you all please go to the participants tab and change your name to your country? That'll be super helpful for all of us. It might also be helpful to turn off your camera for bandwidth if you're experiencing bandwidth issues. Two helpful reminders there. And also please mute during the opening ceremony. Very helpful for us. All right. Having said that, welcome to Montana Model United Nations 2020. We're excited to see so many new and returning faces at our conference. My name is Taylor Gregory, and I am your Secretary General for Internal Affairs.
And my name is Zoe Svisky. I am your Secretary General for External Affairs. We have been working the last 3 months to put together what we hope will be our most successful conference yet. We know that you have been working just as hard, whether this is your first year or your last year. We hope your hard work pays off. We would now like to introduce this year's MMUN leadership. Assistant Secretary General for Internal Affairs, Derek Norberg. Assistant Secretary General for External Affairs, Mackie Haller. Director of Operations and Fundraising, Caroline Fowler. High School and Media Liaison, Dana Helland. Chair Liaison, Shang Vang. Faculty Advisors, Professor Karen Adams and Professor Ava Maji. And our teaching assistant, Daly Durnell.
Thank you, Zoe. I'd now like to introduce this year's committee staff for Montana Model UN 2020. General Assembly First Committee staff. Our ex-com is Caroline Fowler. Chair is Elizabeth Bowles. Our Vice Chair, Lawrence Moore. Rapporteur, Nathaniel Moore and Ferguson. Our expert, Brandon Fulbrook. Our General Assembly Second Committee staff. Our ex-com, Mackie Haller. Our Chair, Augusta Reinhardt. Our Vice Chair, Cassandra Williams. Our Rapporteur, Timothy McFarlane. Our expert, Finn Anderson. UN Environment Assembly, UNEA staff. Our ex-com, Zoe Savisky. Our Chair, Taylor Curry. Our Vice Chair, Scott O'Donnell. Our Rapporteur and expert, Canyon Locke. UN Human Settlements, UN Habitat staff. Ex-com and Chair, Shang Vang. Our Vice Chair, Cameron Vaughn. And our Rapporteur and expert, Gemma Sladich. Lastly, but not least, our Security Council staff, ex-com Derek Norberg and Dana Helland. Chair, Nick Sylvia. Our Vice Chair, Vanessa Estrada. Our Rapporteur, Tyler Worm. And our expert, Davis Graham. Thank you to both the staff and the conference leadership for assembling this conference this year. This was an especially challenging task this year because, as you know, COVID-19 meant we had to move the whole conference online for the first time in its 55-year history. So thank you to all the staff, and thank you, the high school delegates and teachers, for participating in the conference today. I now invite Secretary General External, Zoe Savisky, to say a few words about the conference before we begin.
Welcome, delegates, to the 2020 Montana Model United Nations. While it is disheartening that we cannot host you in person on our lovely campus this year, I am so incredibly pleased to see so many familiar schools attending online. Our staff has been working incredibly hard on this conference to find a way to bring it to you this year, despite all the circumstances that come with a global pandemic. Today, each and every one of you will be debating and finding solutions on a wide variety of topics that are significant and reflective to the current issues being discussed on the world stage. As this conference starts and through today, I look forward to watching you all work together to create incredible solutions to the issues at hand, which are afflicting the globe. Something that I wanted to address is how I got involved with Montana Model United Nations. I started, much like you, in high school, all the way back in Washington State. And while we did not have a club, my high school at the time had an AP World Government course, which had us simulate the United Nations. We ran a few simulations over the course of a semester. Truly, that is when I fell in love with the environment that Model United Nations provided me with. During my time in that class, I had the pleasure to represent the nations of Lithuania, Germany, and Russia. I found myself immersed in research time and time again, and I enjoyed it so much. That's when I knew that Model United Nations was something that I wanted to continue to pursue in college as a political science major. Model United Nations has helped me grow into myself over the last few years. It has given me the confidence to be able to speak in front of people who are not my close acquaintances. I suppose that's why I can stand here and talk to you all today. Over the last semester, I've had the wonderful opportunity to be your Secretary General of External Affairs. And while I had no idea that we'd be facing a global pandemic that would force us online and to socially distance when in person, I feel so privileged to be given this opportunity to work with all of you, especially as I only joined this organization 1 year ago. I joined Montana Model United Nations in my sophomore year of college, and the opportunities that UM has provided me with to grow has helped me become the person I am today. I wish I knew how to put into words just how grateful I am for the opportunities that I've been able to receive. Just 1 year ago, I never thought that I would be in the role of someone that I had looked up to just last year. I look forward to spending the rest of my time in college working on this amazing conference. It has helped me move forward for years and helping it move forward for years to come. Montana Model United Nations has helped me figure out what I would like to do with my future. After I graduate in the spring of 2022, I hope to go forward and volunteer with the United Nations and then go on to law school where I can practice international law, where I get to work with a wide variety of people and nations. I would have never realized that this is what I wanted to do without the amazing organization and without the support of so many wonderful teachers that have supported me in all my endeavors. Now, I want to talk about an issue that means so much to me, something that not a lot of people know that's happening or what's happening really on a large scale. For background, ethnically, I am a German-Polish woman by one half of my family. I've always been incredibly proud of who I am and where I come from. But I wanted to draw attention to the riots that are taking place in Poland as my topic of choice today, as there is not enough attention on the issue. Currently, Poland is being uprooted by riots to protest an abortion ban, which seeks to take a woman's choice from her on what she can do with her body. We can see echoing sentiments here in the United States, which of course is frightening, as we have always been a progressive and forward-thinking nation. Women deserve the right to decide what to do with their bodies, when and where that might be. But it is also so much more than an abortion in Poland. Many women rely on their individuality being respected, their choice being respected, and they rely on unbiased healthcare. That is why these amazing women are taking to the streets, protesting, and in response, they are being tear gassed and arrested for no other reason than they are fighting for their rights as women and as Polish citizens. The government has lost communication with its people. They lost communication as they strove to restrict basic human rights. Not only am I a woman of German-Polish descent, but I am also a woman who is a part of the LGBTQ community. And I've always looked at where my family has immigrated from, and I have felt proud to know that I come from such a culturally diverse nation, one that has taken pride in accepting its cultural diversity. This year, I was hoping for the opportunity to study abroad in Europe over the spring semester. Of course, this was before COVID-19 began. I was going to apply to a university in Austria, just close enough that I could visit Poland and see where my family had lived. But now I fear to think what would happen to me as a woman, and as a woman in a community that has been routinely attacked and targeted by laws that seek to restrict the rights of citizens. Now thinking back on entering a place that I had once been so excited to experience and see has turned into a fear. I cannot help but wonder what would happen if I were to seek care and if I had to make a choice. I wanted to draw attention to the significant issues in Poland, not just because of my connection, but also because of my concern for those who have to fight for their basic rights in a nation that not too long ago was somewhere that many people felt safe. I draw attention to it because the news outlets do not. As we people should be able to support those who are going through a time of uncertainty. I raise attention to it because they deserve to be heard. Women in the LGBT community in Poland deserve support. I only have one question that I hope you all will think about when going forward after this conference is over. Today, you are writing resolutions to better the lives of people around the world on such a wide variety of topics. I want to see that continue. I want to see you all go on to do amazing things for the world as you find yourselves, as you go to college and grow. So I leave you with the question, who has the right to tell someone what they can and cannot do with their body? And if not in compliance with your beliefs, do you believe that people deserve to be hurt when asking for those right to choose what they can do for themselves and with their own bodies? Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak and to be your Secretary General External for this year. I would now like to turn it back to Taylor so he may say a few words about the conference.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Zoe. All right. Welcome, delegates, to the 2020 Montana Model United Nations Conference. It's great to virtually see all of you as you discuss some of the most pressing issues of our time. Today, you will all be debating topics ranging from sustainable development to biodiversity loss to the protection of civilians in armed conflict. While these topics are immediate concerns to all of us, they're ones that are likely to persist in the coming decades. And I'm excited to see your engagement as young leaders in finding solutions to these shared challenges. My story with Model UN begins where all of you are sitting right now. In high school, I represented Burkina Faso in Canada, which is what inspired me to attend the University of Montana's political science program. I enjoyed stepping into the shoes of other nations and seeing issues from their points of view. The passion that I gained for MUN during high school has stuck with me ever since, and I'm proud to say that this is my 6th year participating in Montana Model UN. When I accepted the position of Secretary General Internal last November, I had never envisioned speaking to you all today through Zoom. I didn't even know what Zoom was until March, if we're being honest. This year has been an extraordinary one for so many reasons. From a deadly pandemic to a global movement for racial justice to a presidential election like no other before it. 2020 is certainly one for the history books and an interesting year to share with you all for my last Montana Model UN conference. As I reflect on my time with this program, I'd like to share with you all one memory of mine that would not have been possible without this organization. When I was the traveling team president my sophomore year of college, the University of Montana was assigned to represent the small Eastern European country of Bosnia and Herzegovina at the annual New York conference. At the time, I did not know anything about the country, and I dove right in with researching this beautiful place. I learned that as Yugoslavia dissolved during the 1990s, Bosnia was thrust in the middle of a violent civil war, including genocide and human displacement unseen since World War II. During my research for the National MUN Conference, I read about the tragic story of the 1995 Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia, where 8,000 Muslim men and boys were killed by the Serbs with the goal of creating a greater Serbia. I read story after story of Srebrenica, wondering how the world could let something so terrible happen, especially after the horrors of the Holocaust. The traveling team performed well at that conference, and the following summer, I moved to Brussels, Belgium for a study abroad experience. I lived with a host mom and studied European peace and security studies, only a mile away from the headquarters of the European Union. My time there was absolutely amazing, and I tried to see as much of Europe as possible. After intensely researching Bosnia for over a year at that point, I decided that I had to visit this place, as plane tickets were not too expensive from Brussels, and I had a week off of school in October to travel. I landed in Sarajevo, and it was one of the most beautifully complex places I've ever seen. It reminded me of my home in Montana, with the mountain ranges and the river flowing through the center of town. It was my first time in a Muslim majority country, and the mosques were so beautifully constructed that I could stare at them for hours. Yet beneath all this natural and man-made beauty, the scars of the deadliest European conflict since World War II looked fresh and raw. Holes from shrapnel still puncture the walls of buildings. Thousands of white and gray tombstones line the many city graveyards. And 200 red roses of Sarajevo mark a spot where at least 3 people were killed by a mortar shell explosion during the siege of Sarajevo. The town, which was the host of the 1984 Winter Olympics, looked as if it was a city slowly coming out of a coma. During my time there, I visited the site of the Srebrenica massacre in eastern Bosnia. My tour guide was a former soldier who fought for the Bosniak Muslim army during the war when he was my age, and he recounted the war from his perspective. As I walked through the old UN building, which still has broken glass and pamphlets from the 90s on the ground, I read the stories of those who had died. This experience was incredibly powerful for me because I saw photographs of the deceased, and I could see myself in each one, as they were all men, many of them my age, and they all had families and friends, passions, goals, and dreams that were ripped from them due to something that was out of their control. After the tour of the Srebrenica Cemetery and Memorial, my guide drove me to see a woman named Safa on the Serbian border who lost many male loved ones during the genocide. She made us traditional Bosnian coffee and snacks, and I was able to have a conversation with her through my guide as an interpreter about her life and ways that she coped with losing those around her. I remember that Safa looked at me and said, quote, "For what I've been through and this country, things are finally okay." Even though I could see incredible sadness in her eyes, I saw someone who was resilient in the face of unimaginable loss. In tragedies such as Srebrenica, this is what most often becomes forgotten: the faces and stories like hers and those who died, instead of politicians, treaties, and economies. Without Model UN, I never would have had this experience, and to see how significantly international policies impact not only a nation, but people on a very personal level. After graduation, I plan on working in the field of international education to understand how complex, multifaceted topics such as genocide, refugees, and war are learned and communicated in an educational setting to promote positive change in the world. Model UN has been a cornerstone in my abilities to learn about the world around me and has prepared me to be successful both inside and outside the classroom. As you are negotiating and debating large, complex topics today, I invite you to not forget those like Safa, who are impacted by national and international decisions every day. 2020 may be unprecedented in so many ways, but it is also the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre this year and the failure of the international community to protect those in conflict. Let us not be afraid to discuss and to learn from atrocities in the past. It is the only way that we can learn from our mistakes. Before I wrap up my speech, I want to reinforce Safa's words that things will be okay. The solution to these topics lay not in unilateralism, but through uplifting individuals who in turn uplift their communities, governments, nations, and collective values. You all as delegates here today are positioned to be an advocate for positive change in the United States and around the world. As you approach your negotiations today and going forward, I offer 3 short pieces of advice. 1, don't forget the individual and how your actions, big or small, impact the lives of others. 2, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And lastly, be present and be compassionate. The United Nations today is a testimony to individuals like you and all of us, people who see a world not of anarchy, but of cooperation against challenges, both big and small. I am so thankful for the opportunity to help lead this conference and to be a part of your Model UN experience. Thank you, delegates, for your participation, and best of luck today as you step into the shoes of other nations. Thank you all. See you, President. All right. Up next in the agenda, we have President Bodner, who's going to come and speak, and Dean Larry Hufford, but they are not present with us as of right now. They'll hop on very shortly. So as of now, I would like to introduce Professor Eva Maji to welcome and introduce our keynote speaker for today's conference.
Thank you, Taylor. I'm so excited to be here this morning. I hope you can all hear me. Let me extend my welcome to this truly exceptional Model United Nations. It cannot be overstated how extraordinary it is that this conference is happening despite the current global pandemic that limits all of our lives here in Montana on a daily basis. For me, it is comforting to know that the creativity of many involved and their devotion to the cause of sharing the experience of international cooperation with all of you contributed to making this conference happen. I'm proud of this accomplishment, and please join me in congratulating everybody to make this happening. But now let me introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Marshall Bloom. Dr. Bloom is an international renowned expert on viruses, various viruses actually, and chief of the biology of vector-borne viruses section in the Laboratory of Virology and the associate director for scientific management at Rocky Mountain Laboratories, right down the road in Hamilton, Montana. Rocky Mountain Labs is a part of the division of intramural research of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Bloom is returning to Model UN this year with a talk that could not be more timely, Pandemic Viruses, Global Citizens, in which he will discuss how the current pandemic compares to those we have already experienced in the past, but we'll also talk about the current challenges that this pandemic poses. Dr. Bloom has been the spokesperson for the Rocky Mountain Lab COVID-19 research program and has played a significant role in the institutional response. Join me in welcoming Dr. Marshall Bloom.
Okay, Professor Maji, thank you for that very kind introduction. I assume you can hear me. Taylor, if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Okay. Honorable Secretaries General, delegates to the General Assembly, and members of the Security Council. I want to thank you for giving me this inestimable honor of talking to you, the Montana Model United Nations today. Your job and your mission could not be more important in today's world than at any time in the past. And I commend you, especially the two Secretaries General, for their wonderful comments, which I find very emotional. And I'm now going to share my screen and try to relate to you why I am confident you will do a great job today, and why I am confident that the work you are engaged in is more important than ever. So briefly, I was asked to tell you a little bit about the Rocky Mountain Laboratories. We're located in the Bitterroot Valley, about 50 miles from the University of Montana, which is the virtual hub for your conference. We have roughly 500 staff, 21 principal investigators, which would be like professors in a university, and we have a variety of support people. And we work on a host of emerging infectious diseases at different biosafety levels. And our focus is on emerging infectious diseases and pandemics. Before I start, I want to give you just a few definitions that I think will be helpful. So one is emerging infectious diseases. And that's a disease that is identified for the first time or a disease that appears for the first time in a new geographic location, or a disease that has been present at low levels but rapidly reaches significance. And examples of that are Ebola virus and the COVID-19 pandemic. Zoonotic infectious diseases are infectious diseases that spread from animals, everything from ticks to monkeys, to humans. And it's estimated that roughly 70% of the human infectious diseases likely arose from animal infections. Bubonic plague, and of course the coronavirus pandemic is largely thought to be one too. And then terms that you'll see floated around are outbreak, which is a sudden, unanticipated increase in the cases of an infectious disease in a relatively small geographic area or a small group of people. These are sometimes called clusters. An epidemic is a cluster which suddenly increases the cases of an infectious disease in a particular geographic area or a single country. And then a pandemic is an epidemic that involves multiple countries or continents. And I want to point out that pandemics are a special class of emerging infectious diseases. There are about 10 or 12 reasons that emerging infectious diseases arise from animal vectors, and they're listed here. And in terms of the current pandemic, there are 4 which are playing a very, very significant role, and which I hope you will talk about during the course of today's deliberations. One is increased international travel, the transport of animals and food product, decreasing vaccination rates and declining support for public health. And then most relevant to your organization is political instability and deliberate disinformation. And of course, multiple factors among this list can interact. This slide is one that I have from Dr. Fauci from January of 2019, which is before the current pandemic. This gives you a feel for the scope of emerging and what are called re-emerging infectious diseases around the world. And you can see there's a large number of them. Some of them have what are called pandemic potential. And some of them have developed into pandemics. And I'd like to briefly comment on a couple of those that you all are doubtless familiar with. One is HIV. Or AIDS. HIV is the virus, AIDS is the disease. And this was a global pandemic which started in the 1980s. And the world's response to that pandemic is really a paragon of what an international response should be. And I'll come back to that at the end of my talk. Influenza. This is a virus that arises every year, and it's never clear which of its variants may emerge as a pandemic. There have been about a half a dozen influenza pandemics starting that we know about and are well described, beginning with the 1918 influenza, with which the current pandemic of coronavirus is being compared. Ebola virus disease in West Africa. And then, of course, Zika virus, which spread around the world in 2015 and 2016. And Zika virus would have been rated as sort of a junior varsity type of virus infection had it not caused such disturbing central nervous system abnormalities in unborn babies. Most disturbingly, there have been and continue to be a number of vaccine preventable pandemics that affect the entire world, including Montana. The red that you see is measles, and measles is now resurging. There were more than 200,000 deaths in the last year. So these are pandemics which are preventable with vaccines that are at hand. And you can contemplate over the course of the day what are the factors which are enabling vaccine preventable pandemics from exerting their havoc. And then, of course, we have the current COVID-19 pandemic, which is caused by the SARS coronavirus type 2. COVID-19 is the disease. SARS coronavirus type 2 is the name of the virus that causes it. And I want to share with you a slide from March 9th, which shows the extent of the coronavirus infection pandemic at that time. You can see back in March, when we had already gone virtual, there were about 100,000 total cases around the world and 4,000 deaths. And you'll note the extent of the pandemic in the United States at that time. However, about a week ago, you can see that the United States now has more cases, and these numbers are about a week old, but they haven't gotten any better. You can see now that the US has more cases than any other country in the world. And there's almost 50 million people have acquired this pandemic, this infection so far, and there have been over 1 million deaths worldwide. A tragedy of unimaginable proportions. And if you look down here in the lower right, you can see the course of those cases from March. And this virus was initially identified on December 31st in the city of Wuhan, China. And you can see the inexorable march of this virus across the world. In Montana, and again, this slide is about a week old, we haven't been spared. We have now close to 40,000 cases, and these cases, as you can see down here, are increasing at an exponential rate, which is very worrisome. There have been now close to 500 deaths in Montana, and as you know from reading the papers and observing the media, the hospitals are overstretched to capacity. I don't care what part of Montana you're coming from or what part of the world you represent. The medical resources and staff and supplies in all of those locations are stretched beyond any imagination. A very, very dire situation. And my point today for you is that these pandemic viruses are actually global citizens, and that global problems require global solutions. And what do we need to address global pandemics? This is a partial list. We need to have continuous international surveillance, particularly in those areas where it is suspected that pandemic viruses have a good opportunity for emerging. Since most of these pandemics, all of them to date, in fact, arise from animal reservoirs, we need to have ecological investigations in those locations. There needs to be an urgent and a robust response to emerging outbreaks wherever they occur to minimize the potential for those outbreaks from becoming epidemics and pandemics. We need to have a coordinated international response to pandemics. It's not possible for one country to go it alone because the viruses, as I mentioned, are global citizens. We need to have prioritization of immunization programs. We need to have international trust, international cooperation, and international collaborations. We need to have open international community. And I guess goes without saying here, trust, cooperation, and collaboration means we can't have scapegoating. We need to have open international communication, and we need to have rapid sharing of scientific findings and resources. Or as a friend of mine, the former president of the American Association on the Advancement of Science has put it, we need to have science without borders. And finally, there needs to be money. The member states to the United Nations need to pay up their share to protect the entire world. And some of the organizations to address these global pandemics, and again, this is just a partial list. We have the World Health Organization, and I know you're all very familiar with that. There's the United Nations Children's Fund, because pandemics, like every other dire situation that affects the world, usually affects the most helpless the most. And in general, those are children and their mothers around the world. There's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a private philanthropic organization headquartered in Seattle, which has really stepped into the gap as nations have failed to meet their commitments. Certainly, there's a medical service called ProMed, and they put out a daily digest, and that's really a monitoring newsletter for pandemic and potential pandemics and infectious disease outbreaks around the world. It was ProMed that first reported on December 31st an unusual outbreak of pneumonia in Wuhan, China. Doctors Without Borders is a non-governmental organization which is able to rapidly mobilize and address pandemics in the most unusual parts of the world, including places like West Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo. They are non-political, so they tend to be more trusted than some of the national and formal organizations. Are the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, known as the CDC, and then CDC equivalents, which exist in almost every country and continent. There's the African Centers for Disease Control, and there's also the European Centers for Disease Control. And then addition, other non-governmental organizations, and the only one I would like to draw specific attention to here is one called EcoHealth Alliance, which focuses on what's called the One Health philosophy of infectious disease research, recognizing that infectious diseases in animals have not only affect people, but they can also have dire effects on wildlife populations. A wonderful, terrible example of that is the Ebola virus, which is as lethal to the great apes, many of which are endangered, as Ebola virus is to people. And so, before I come to my final slide, I have a message I want to share with you which relates back to a novel by Charles Dickens that was published in 1859. And I'm sure, or I hope, that many of you in this conference at the Model UN are familiar with, if not A Tale of Two Cities, at least with Charles Dickens. And this is a story set in London and Paris during the French Revolution. And I want to share with you the opening paragraph of that short novel. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. In short, the period was so far like the present period. So it is up to the members, the delegates of the General Assembly and the Security Council to determine, are we in the best of times or the worst of times? And what path will we take going forward? We are in the best of times. I think we're in the best of times because we have the best scientists in the world in almost all countries. We have the best and most rapid means of communication back and forth with each other. And we have, in many cases, adequate infrastructure. However, it's also the worst of times, largely because of political instability and deliberate misinformation, and nationalism and tribalism. And these go to give us so it's like a balance. We have the best of times and the worst of times. And the choice is going to be up to you in the United Nations, and also as you move out of your model United Nations and become true citizens of the world. And I want to simply end the final slides with some lessons that we learned from HIV/AIDS, which, as I noted before, is one pandemic in which the international response was extremely good. We need to commit substantial financial and human resources, not only in the United States, but internationally, and not just to scientific and medical research. Many of the problems associated with pandemics like HIV/AIDS and COVID-19 are really social anthropology issues, political issues, and issues of personal responsibility. We need to commit resources for that. We need to enlist the best and the brightest investigators in basic clinical research, domestically and internationally. I feel that the scientific and the medical community have done an outstanding job in the current pandemic in this regard. We need to engage the affected community. This is proving to be very challenging, particularly in rural states like Montana, where the acceptance of the scientific research and the medical advice is being not only disregarded, but actively discounted and dismissed. We need to foster cross-sector collaboration with industry, academia, global organizations, philanthropies, and NGOs, as I depicted in the most recent slide. In most of the world, this is going on very well. However, as you may know, the United States has withdrawn from the World Health Organization, which is a part of the United Nations, which has really been very unfortunate because it is depriving the world of our expertise, and it is depriving the United States of the expertise and the information being developed in other parts of the world. And finally, we need to garner the support of leaders and policymakers. This is an extreme shortcoming in the state of Montana, in the United States, and then elsewhere in the world. So with that, I would like to thank my director, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who I'm sure everyone has heard of, and some of the members of his staff, particularly Greg Folkers, the Visual Medical Arts Department here at Rocky Mountain Labs, Ken Pico, a UM graduate who's our indefatigable public affairs officer, all the scientists here at Rocky Mountain Labs, and all of you, the secretaries general, the members of the Security Council, and the delegates of the General Assembly. And I am supported by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease program of NIH. And my final slide is a message from Dr. Fauci, which appeared on the cover of the Washingtonian magazine, I think like last month. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Professor Maggi.
Terrific. Thank you, Dr. Bloom, for your talk and for discussing this really important topic with all of us. Before we turn it over for questions quickly, Dean Larry Hufford and President Bodner have joined us, so we'll turn it over to them quickly to say a couple of words, and then we'll turn it over for questions. So I also want to remark quickly that Montana Model UN receives financial contribution from the President's office, and we're really appreciative of President Bodner's support and enthusiasm in supporting the conference each year and in welcoming all the students and teachers here for today's conference. So welcome, President Bodner and Dean Hufford. Thank you for being here. My apologies for the delay, and I'll turn it over to you quickly.
All right, there we go. I was trying to figure out the signal for please unmute me, Taylor. So thank you very much, Taylor. And actually, this worked out perfectly. You know, I thought I was supposed to welcome the group at 9, but I now had the privilege of getting to see Dr. Bloom's presentation, which was fantastic. So thank you, Dr. Bloom. You know, I do just want to emphasize to everybody here, you just heard from literally a world-renowned expert who runs, you know, the Rocky Mountain Lab right here in our backyard, right down the road from us, or I guess up the road from us in Hamilton, and the research, the cutting-edge research that is happening right here in Montana, and the work that Dr. Bloom and his team do is incredible. And so. Dr. Bloom, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I don't know if you've seen the chat, but there is a burgeoning Dr. Bloom fan club that is emerging here. And count me already in that fan club. He already knows. I had a chance to go down and spend some time with Marshall and his team this year and a half ago. And it is just such a privilege. So thank you, Dr. Bloom. And your words, I think, were a great kickoff to this session. The Model United Nations is something that is so important for this campus. It's a great legacy here at the University of Montana. I think we've had high school student leaders participating in this event for more than 50 years, which is you are joining all of your high school students, a great group, and the legacy of some very impactful alumni. And I want to really thank Professor Karen Adams for her leadership in making this conference possible, and also to our students in Poli-Sci 337, our U of M students who make this conference possible. It's through their hard work that we're able to do this, and this is a great example of the type of education that you have here at the University of Montana. My only sadness this year is that we don't have you here with us in person. And I hope that those of you on this call who either live right here in Missoula or close by or elsewhere will come visit us. We have an incredible university here with excellent programs across disciplines. I know many of you are interested in issues like policy. Obviously, you're getting a taste of the quality of our political science department. But hopefully you'll also get a chance to see things like the Mansfield Center here at the University of Montana. Mike Mansfield, a great politician, ambassador, statesperson from our wonderful state. He and his wife established a center here at the University of Montana to continue to educate on the importance of public service. Also, the Baucus Institute. Many of you know Senator Max Baucus and Ambassador Max Baucus. Another great opportunity. We send students every summer to intern in the top offices in government in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. We have an incredible law school here that outranks Ivy League law schools on some measures, and a great Department of Public Administration and Policy. And so for those of you interested in learning about policy, this is the best place in the region to do so. Those of you interested in science and technology, you want to follow in Dr. Bloom's footsteps. Incredible natural sciences here. We happen to have the #1 wildlife biology program in the entire continent right here at the University of Montana. Our College of Forestry and Conservation is nationally renowned. The work our researchers do in the environment and sustainability. Nobel Prize winning researchers like Dr. Steve Running here on our campus, and many others, just incredible advances that they're making right here on this campus. Those of you interested in computer science, data science, science and technology is a great strength of this university, as is business. The #1 business school in the entire Big Sky, 11 state region, #1 business school. So, and of course, health sciences. Dr. Bloom's presentation on the current challenges we're facing is so important. And those of you interested in entering the medical field, you'll be happy to know that University of Montana pre-med students got into medical school at a rate of about 20% higher than the national average over the past decade. The fact that we have pharmacy, PT, all these schools, and last year, in fact, we established one of only a few in the country. We established a joint academic health department with the Missoula City County Health Department. So a lot of the epidemiological work that you're seeing, and that's the study of the progression of the virus and all those charts that you're seeing presented, those are being done by our faculty and by our students, actually, in our public health program. So some of Dr. Bloom's recommendations, our faculty and our students are working on those right now live. And we also have at the same time critical work on a COVID vaccine happening right here on this campus. Dr. Jay Evans in our Center for Translational Medicine is on the leading edge of vaccine development. And in fact, University of Montana was cited as one of the top 10 universities in the entire world solving the coronavirus pandemic earlier this year. So all that's to say, come and visit us. I think you'll love what you see here. Whether you do visit us or not, though, and this is where I want to close, is by thanking you. You saw, and I thank you, Dr. Bloom. You're a true Renaissance man being a scientist, a policymaker, and a literature professor here all in one, I thought it was very fitting to have the quote from Charles Dickens, and because it is the best of times and it's the worst of times. But here's the thing: you have the opportunity to make it the best of times. You are the future of this country, and I want to thank you for being engaged in understanding, caring about, participating in the dialogues that animate our times and that will determine the future of not just this country but this world. I thought it was, and I want you to remember Dr. Bloom's characterization of a pandemic as a global citizen. It is the way we combat pandemics, the way we can combat the pandemic of disinformation currently affecting this global society, the pandemic of political and partisan gridlock. The way we combat those types of pandemics is also with global citizens, young people who care, who are engaged in the future direction of their communities. That's what we need to address the challenges that we have today and the challenges that we will inevitably face tomorrow. One of the things I always tell, and you have a chance to meet Taylor Gregory here. Taylor is our ASUM president. So Taylor is our student body president here. And one of the things I always say to our student body presidents each year, I talk about the priorities, I talk about the things we're working on, and then I say, and Taylor will remember this, I say, there's going to be something that comes up during this year that we don't know about right now, and we won't be able to predict it. I said it to our ASUM student body president last fall, and COVID hit, and there we go. And I said it again to Taylor, and we knew about COVID, but something else will come up. The point is, there are going to be challenges. There are going to be situations and problems to be solved. The only way we get through those is by having engaged, thoughtful, creative leaders to help us solve them. The University of Montana is full of those types of leaders. That's exactly the world that we're preparing our students to enter. We want you to be career ready, and we say that we're going to find lots of ways to make sure that you're ready to succeed in your job on day one. But at the same time, we work hard to make sure you are what we call tomorrow proof, because the world's going to create challenges that we can't predict. And through not just your learning in the classroom, but your engagement out of the classroom through activities like Model UN and others, we're steadily and persistently working to help shape you into the leaders of tomorrow. So thank you again for being with us today. I'm so sorry we can't have you here in person. But I am really, really inspired to see this group of future leaders for this country. So keep it up. Stay engaged. We need you. Thank you, everybody.
Do you want me to step in?
Yeah, I guess I was going to, why don't we go over to Dean Hufford.
Wonderful. Thanks, Seth, very much. It's really wonderful to hear your words, and I especially appreciated hearing Dr. Bloom talk about COVID-19 and emerging infectious diseases. As a biologist myself, this was a talk that was really sort of came home to me. As a dean of the humanities and sciences, one of the things that I see is that point on which Dr. Bloom ended, and that is this connection between the humanities, the social sciences, and the sciences. We do this so well at UM, and it's a big part of what the College of Humanities and Sciences is about. And I think that Dr. Bloom has demonstrated just how critical it is that each of us have this knowledge and skill set that extends across these domains of knowledge, from the humanities, the social sciences, and the sciences, to make good decisions going forward. It's wonderful to have this chance to join you this morning, and I'm really delighted to see all of you here. I wish that we were on campus together. It would be so wonderful to be able to meet each of you and to have a chance to shake hands and talk to you face to face. You know, as I think about the United Nations, it represents to me an openness to dialogue and a willingness to engage others in solving difficult problems. And those kinds of difficult problems range from global health issues, such as Dr. Bloom talked about, to issues of food security, from conflict resolution to the immense and pressing problems that we face with global climate change. These are extremely difficult global problems that require agreement and the concerted effort of nations working together to bring about solutions. As I think about the representatives to the United Nations, these are individuals that must have a breadth of knowledge and a skill set to work across these very different kinds of bodies of knowledge and sets of problems. Those representatives need the logic to bring that knowledge to a point of use. They need decision-making skills to choose among options. And they need the ability to work together, to work with others. And most importantly, representatives to the United Nations need an openness to engage with a broad range of people that might disagree with them, but an openness to engage with anyone who's willing to step forward to try to solve these immense problems, an ability to commit oneself to the issues at hand and to working in teams to address these problems. Hosts the Model UN because what you're doing with this really represents our values. It represents the values of a liberal arts education and the knowledge that are the centerpieces of what we do here in the College of Humanities and Sciences. That breadth and that integration of knowledge to solve problems. You know, as the Dean of the College of Humanities and Sciences, I'm very pleased that we are the home to students like you, students with an interest in and an openness to the world, students who want to problem solve and to communicate about those problems with others, students who will engage with others to tackle the biggest issues that we face, these kinds of issues that President Bodner called attention to. Our College of Humanities and Sciences offers political science, history, philosophy, economics, but also in this regard, as we think about integration and breadth of knowledge, biology, chemistry, and a lot of other areas of study. And all of those are essential to providing the knowledge and the skills that are required for the problem solving and the diplomacy that lie at the base, at the foundation of what the United Nations does. We hope you're going to look to as you plan your future, as you continue with this kind of engagement, as you continue to work on being a problem solver. We're so pleased to have you here engaged with the Model UN and to have you engaged with our faculty and students from the University of Montana. Thanks for being here. Like President Bodner, I hope to see you on campus. And if you visit, let me know. I would be glad to sit down and have a chat with you, to go around and have a look at our facilities and help you to meet people on campus. Thanks again so much for being here. I hope you have a really wonderful day.
Thank you, Dean Hufford, and thank you, President Bodner. I will be taking over here for a couple questions we have, as the Model United Nations team here at UM, prepared to ask Dr. Bloom. Before we take it over, we give the chance of all the students to ask questions. So how this will work, I will ask a couple questions, Dr. Bloom and I will have a conversation, and then if you have a question that you would ask Dr. Bloom, please put them here in our chat, and I will ask that question then. Depending how many there are, we might not be able to get to all of them, but we will do our best. Thank you, Marshall, for this wonderful talk. I think we can all agree that it's obviously extremely timely, but we all learned something too. Let me start out with a very concrete question about what can we do today to make our lives and your lives easier. But are there like 3 actions that you can tell us as Montanans to do, what we can do right now to fight this pandemic and make it even shorter? Because I think we're all ready to have this over with, but it's all going to take a while. So can you tell us, what can we do?
Well, I can. And it's a 3-letter phrase which everyone is familiar with. But before I do that, I want to again express my appreciation to the 2 Secretary Generals, Secretary General Gregory and Secretary General Savitsky. As you may have been able to tell, you both had me on the verge of tears. And I really appreciate the maturity and the intellectual effort that went into your comments. I also want to thank UN President Bodnar for some very appropriate and some stirring words, and for Dean Hufford, who I haven't yet had the opportunity to meet in person. I think what they're telling you is what they have told us today is very important, and it's universities like the University of Montana that are going to forge the relationships and create the individuals who are going to go to solve the problems of coronavirus, climate change, and all of the other things. And everything I said in my brief talk about what's needed to fight a pandemic, those are exactly the same factors which have to be brought to bear on other pressing problems in today's world. God willing, we'll have a vaccine and a few other things which will end the pandemic, but the problem of climate change is going to be with us for, I'm afraid, a very, very long time. And again, it is the modeling, it's going to be international groups like the United Nations that are ultimately going to be the ones to forge those solutions, because countries on their own, as we've seen too well, are not going to be able to do it. So in response to your question about what are things we can do, I'm afraid I don't have a quote from William Thackeray or Charles Dickens for that, but I have something, I don't know, which probably goes back to more like Bill Gates or something like that. And I think the things that we can do today are at the start of everyone's browser, www. Wash your hands, watch your distance, and wear a mask. If everyone contributed, if everyone followed those 3 simple rules, estimates vary, but some of the estimates would suggest that that could have the impact of reducing the transmission of this virus by up to 70%, which is just astonishing. And I think it's probably clear to most of you, but just in case, masks serve 2 functions. One is they prevent me from, or they limit me from being exposed to virus that you might have. And as you probably know, roughly 40% of the people that acquire this infection don't show any symptoms. And asymptomatic testing programs around the world identify a number of people who are infected with this virus who don't even know it. The fraction of tests being done in the state of Montana, which are positive, I think now is somewhere in the neighborhood of in excess of 20%. That is an astonishing number of people that are carrying this virus. And if we were sitting in a room all together at this point, and I said that, I'm hoping that most of you would run screaming from the room. But those are the 3 things that I think we can do right now. And boy, it ain't very hard to remember, but there are a lot of officials in the state of Montana that are having problem getting that information. www. Wash your hands, watch your distance, and wear a mask.
Thank you, Marshall. And we have, you can, if anybody wants to ask a question, it's a good time now to put them in the chat so I can I can start reading them. I have one other question before I would take it and take some others. What is Rocky Mountain Labs working on right now in terms of COVID-19 or the virus? I mean, you all probably remember this article in the spring in the New York Times about surfaces and how long the virus stays on surfaces. That came from Rocky Mountain Labs, that research, which was huge. But what is going on right now? What are you working on?
Well, when I say I or we, I have to stress that my answers, meaning we, means they, because it's not me. It's not me. Is that right? It's not I who's actually engaged in most of this work. So I can't take any credit for it personally, but I certainly take great pride in it personally. So our scientists here, and you remember the one slide I showed that says we have to have international surveillance going on. So a number of our scientists have worked on the other pandemics that I mentioned, and those folks who are really emerging virus disease specialists monitor news sites like ProMed and other listservs that talk about emerging infectious diseases. And so as soon as the first reports of the virus, of the pneumonia in Wuhan were reported, their antennas went up. And then when the sequence of the virus was reported in like the second week of January, they did a very quick sequence analysis, and they showed that virus had the capacity to bind to a receptor very, very similar to other pandemic coronaviruses on respiratory tissue, which suggested to them this could be a big problem. And so they actually had proposals to start doing experiments on this virus by the middle of January, before any virus in the United States was available. And so the scientists here at RML were really among the first out of the starting blocks to look at a number of things here. And the work that's being done here now sort of falls in about 4 or 5 different areas. And I may forget some of them. And if I do, somebody can correct me. One is vaccines. A number of and I think you probably have heard that over the last couple of days, a drug company by the name of Pfizer has announced that their vaccine, which is based on RNA, shows 90% effectiveness in preventing the SARS coronavirus infection within the first week of injection. So that's terrific news. But we need to know, what about the second week and the third week and the fourth week and the fifth week? Okay, so some of those studies are being done here. So for some of those studies are being done here at Rocky Mountain Lab, and we are also evaluating other vaccine platforms, which look like they'll be very promising. And I want to hasten to mention that it's not always the first generation vaccine which ends up being the best vaccine, or the vaccine which receives most general acceptance. That was the case for polio, because the first polio vaccine was an inactivated vaccine shot that I remember getting back when I was in like 5th grade, back in the mid 1950s. And then second generation vaccines were developed, which you guys took, on the sugar cube or the drops. And then now a third, because that anti-polio campaign has been so effective. And now there's a third generation vaccine, which is being rolled out to kill the final outbreaks of polio virus around the world. And another example of that is measles vaccine. The measles vaccine that the delegates to the UN today get is not the same one that my kids initially got. So that we can expect multiple generations of vaccines, and they all have to be rigorously tested, and we cannot afford to let political aspirations or meddling interfere with the testing, evaluation, and approval of that vaccine. Okay, Other thing is therapeutics. There are a number of what are called antiviral medications, which are effective to one degree or another against the coronavirus. And unfortunately, again, there are some which have been touted by scientists in other parts of the world and political leaders in the United States, which are very useful. Malaria, but they're totally worthless against COVID-19. That's hydroxyquinone. And there's another drug that we tested here in non-human primates called remdesivir. And remdesivir is a drug which impairs the virus's ability to replicate. And then the third drug, which is a second drug which is effective, is a relatively common steroid, which is an anti-inflammatory drug. And those drugs are, and some of that work has been done here in animal systems. None of those drugs are what I would consider to be a silver bullet, which is going to kill the werewolf or the vampire, but they're effective. Remdesivir is a drug which stops the virus. The way that this disease proceeds is you have an initial infection where the virus grows to quite high levels. People are sick, then the virus drops off. So remdesivir is effective during that period when the virus is replicating. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 disease is characterized not only by that initial infection, but by a very intense inflammatory response of our bodies. And that's what really usually puts people in the hospital and into intensive care or worse. The remdesivir is not effective in that setting. And it's thought that the dexamethasone, which is a fancy kind of steroid, is effective there. So really, that's very sophisticated. You have one drug which you have to give early and one drug which you have to give late. Then another class of what we call countermeasures that's being examined here are what are called modulators of the immune system. And this is a little bit complicated in the first place, and complicated because I'm not able to explain it. But I think, I'm giving you way more of an answer that you wanted, but I hope it's okay. You really have to think, and I didn't have this slide in my talk, you really have to consider that the countermeasures against the COVID-19 pandemic, you need to think of them as a block of Swiss cheese. So masks, if you consider a slice of the Swiss cheese as masks, so there's going to be some holes in that slice of Swiss cheese, so some of the virus is going to get through. If you consider washing your hands, another slice of the Swiss cheese, some of the virus is going to get through that. If you consider watching your distance as another slice, some of the virus is going to get through that. The medications are going to be slices of Swiss cheese, and the vaccine is going to be another slice of Swiss cheese. Through any one of those slices of Swiss cheese, the virus has a chance of getting through. But when you put all those slices together in a block of Swiss cheese, the virus ain't going to be able to get through. So that's why the personal responsibility elements like WWW are important. That's why the vaccine is going to be important. That's why the medication and everything else is going to be important. So that in a nutshell is kind of what we're doing down here. We're not making, although I don't want you to get the impression that we're making cheese in the laboratory.
Well, but I love that analogy. I think probably everybody agrees. That makes a lot of sense to me, to actually bring everything together so we can be effectively fighting this virus. Thank you, Marshall.
Now, I stole that idea from a scientist, a friend in Australia, but I think
great.
it's
International cooperation right here. That's a good example too. So we got a lot of questions here in our chat, and I think one of the main ones here is schools. Obviously, we all having high school students here, and I will just summarize the ones that came here. And I don't know to which extent you can answer that, but There has been a discussion a couple of weeks back to go back to a 5-day schedule of schools. And that comes here from a high school teacher in Missoula. And one part is that, to which extent do you think it would make sense to go back to this 5-day schooling? But also, to which extent do actually schools contribute to the spread of the virus in the first place? And basically, what can schools do to stop the virus, or what role do they play in the pandemic right now?
Well, when you say school, that includes everything from kindergarten to graduate school. So,
right.
And
high school, I think, is here the main focus. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So the evidence so far, and I can't cite you chapter and verse, but if you look on the Centers for Disease Control website, you probably find some probably find some more solid information. The evidence so far suggests that being in school in and of itself, if all the kids are wearing, all the students are wearing masks and, respecting social distancing and performing hand hygiene as possible, that the amount of transmission back and forth in schools is actually pretty limited. The biggest threat is actually, it's going to be somebody picking it up from a family member, or from what happened down here in the Bitterroot, a Halloween party or something like that, and then becoming infected there and then going back to school. The schools, at least here in the Bitterroot Valley, are doing a pretty good job of that. So the students, it's pretty easy to get students to wear masks when they're in school, because you've got a teacher there who's going to keep an eye on them. But, high schools, and I was a high school student too, and so were you, and so was President Bodner and everybody else. It's what happens after high school. So when I drive home, I drive down the main street of Hamilton, and I see congregations of high school students who doubtless were very diligent in wearing their masks, when they're at school, sitting on a bench in front of one of the coffee bars, sitting there 4 or 5 right next to each other on the single bench, yucking it up, maybe sharing a candy bar or a bag of chips. None of them wearing masks, and probably not practicing the proper kind of hand hygiene. So, I mean, that's the risk. And I know I have some friends who've actually acquired this, and it's one of these things where you really can't let down your vigilance. That one party, well, you think, well, those friends of mine are all okay. You can't be sure that one of those is okay. So you have to be very, very careful. I think the 3 places around the country which are having an inordinate amount of impact on the number of cases are, 1, bars, which of course isn't a surprise, social events, large social events, churches, if you can imagine that, and then other kinds of social gatherings. And of course, one of the biggest issues in the K through 12 education is you not only have the students, but teachers can get sick too. And most of the substitute teachers that you guys have probably had in high school are, probably people close to my age than to your age. They are in what are considered to be high-risk populations. And so they're going to be reluctant to go into the school as substitute teachers. And so several schools that I'm aware of have had to shut down, not because the kids the students are all sick, but because of outbreaks occurring among the staff and the paraprofessionals. So that's a long-winded answer to say I don't really know.
No, but I think it was great, and it covered a lot of the questions that we got here. Kind of tacking to a different area. So with all the cases in the United States growing right now so much, what do you think, which extent of lockdown would limit the spread, or at all lockdowns? But what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think you guys know the answer is, you know, I don't think any measure would be too extreme for to affect the pandemic. And the other thing we have to remember is it takes people about 10 days to get sick after they get this. So even if we started a lockdown today, or put in place a mask mandate today, we wouldn't see any effects of that for probably close to 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But we have to recognize, and it's not just in Montana, that it's going to prove impossible to get everybody to wear a mask. And we have all read stories here in Montana about someone going into a shop and the proprietor saying, "Would you please put your mask on?" And then the person starts spitting at them or cursing at them, and creates a great upheaval. So a mask mandate is only going to be as good as the willingness of the citizenry to comply with that. And I think the analogy, and it's astonishing to me, the resistance to the simple act of wearing a mask, but boy, it's sure a big problem. And the analogy, and the analogies to previous examples are seatbelt laws. When people first started proposing seatbelts for cars, you heard some of the same bizarre arguments about how, number one, you're interfering with my rights, and then bizarre arguments. Well, if I have a wreck and my car catches on fire, I'm not going to get out because I have my seatbelt on, and so I'm going to suffer a worse fate. And of course, all of that was nonsense. And then gradually, people began to understand, when the statistics started coming out, that those places that had the most effective seatbelt laws were having a lot less people dying. And now, even here in the state of Montana, most people wear a seatbelt. Okay, but on the other hand, that's the law. But the highway patrol doesn't drive down, with a periscope looking into every car. It's people's accepting the personal responsibility to protect themselves and to protect others, which is going to make the difference. And we have a long way to go in that regard here in the state of Montana and in the United States, and in fact around the world. But as one of the delegates said, we need facts. Yes, that's certainly true. But there are a lot of people that are immune to facts these days due to deliberate misinformation. So it's going to be a challenging education process. And but like I said, masks are, again, just one slice of the Swiss cheese. So I think what we have to do is try to understand, what's motivating people not to follow what are, to most of us here, I would hope, totally common sense things. And that was what I referred to. People refer to what the common term for that is tribalism, or is politics. But it's not really politics. It's tribalism, and it's really a problem in social anthropology. So the mandates would be effective, but they're only effective if people are going to follow them. You can't expect the police department in, Dillon or in Missoula or Great Falls to start going into the grocery store and arresting people who aren't wearing a mask. It just isn't going to happen. Number one, there aren't enough police officers. So, it's personal responsibility is key.
Thank you, Marshall. We are almost done with our time, but I want to make sure that we cover this one area of questions that you basically already touched upon. So how do you think, so the WWW is great and important, but how can, the students and we can talk to people, or how can we make people believe in science that don't, and are consuming disinformation? So what can we do there? And kind of comes into the same, how can we restore the public trust in our health experts in this polarized society? What do you think?
Well, I'm hopeful that, the term that have all heard through high school is lead by example. And you can be a good example or you can be a bad example, but lead by example. So I'm hopeful that we're going to have some better leadership, and at the national level there'll be some better setting of some better examples for people to follow. I don't think you can underestimate the importance of that. And I would urge all of the delegates and the Security Council members here to remember the same thing. Wear your mask. You're said, in your schools, I'm assuming that you all are considered to be leaders. So you need to wear your mask. You need to wash your hands. You need to maintain social distance and to, try to avoid situations which, are obviously dangerous, like, keggers and Halloween parties and things like that. So we all have to try to lead by example and hope that at some point the force of logic is gonna win out. But I mean, boy, that's the $64 zillion question.
Yeah, I love that question too. So let's close this up just to one look into the future. That is a little bit more scientific, that question. That's why I'm picking it up right at the end. So how do you think global health challenges will continue in this future? Do you think it's going to be in form of coronaviruses like SARS or MERS, or do you think it will take a different form or class of virus, or maybe bacteria or even prions?
Well, I doubt it's going to be prions. So it's funny because in 2016, I was asked to give a talk at Flathead Valley Community Colleges on predicting pandemics. And I gave my March Madness, bracket of what I thought were going to be pandemic viruses at that time. And on that list were actually SARS type coronaviruses. Okay. But I guess most of us would probably bet on influenza as influenza, because that's caused the most pandemics around the world, at least since time since time which has been episodes which have been recorded accurately throughout history. But I think one thing is, it's clear it's not going to be a tick-borne infection, because there simply ain't enough ticks all over the world. There are plenty of ticks, but we don't come in contact with them. Okay, it's probably not going to be a bacteria. It's probably going to be a virus. It's probably going to be a virus that we've at least heard about. And it's probably going to be a virus which is spread by respiratory route. And that's going to be influenza virus, similar influenza-like viruses, and it's going to be viruses like coronaviruses. And there's a huge amount of work being done in this. And unfortunately, when the United States withdrew from some of those international efforts, one of those efforts was to look in places like in parts of China, where now 2 pandemic viruses have arisen from bats, from coronavirus in China. And so there were efforts going on to identify viruses which might have those kinds of pathogenic potential. And they now know, at least with coronavirus, what to look for. Okay, is it a virus that the sequence of the spike protein, and coronaviruses are decorated with spikes, like the one I'm holding right here, okay? And they now know that on the tips of these spikes, that's where the virus gloms on to cells. And they now know some of the sequences to look for in those spike proteins to see if they're going to interact with human proteins on human cells, which might be a problem. So I think the prediction of pandemic coronaviruses is probably going to improve. Influenza has the ability to, like a real shapeshifter. But I have an old friend, and he always used to say, he was a bacteriologist, but his comment was, always bet on the bug. And so, although I think it's likely to be an influenza virus or maybe another coronavirus, I think we've got to keep our eyes open. But no matter what it is, I can tell you that washing your hands, okay, and washing your distance, maybe not wearing a mask, forever, but certainly washing your hands. One of the astonishing things about this pandemic has been, as people began to wear their masks, wash their hands, and watch their distance, the incidence of other respiratory infections has gone down too. Because what's good against coronavirus is good against influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, the non-pandemic coronaviruses, and everything else. So with that, looks like we ran out of time. I'm sorry.
Right. I will end this our talk here with one last question, which is very specific on what the high school students face right now as decision making, and how a lot of them are graduating this upcoming spring, and still doubting their choices in majors entering college. What led you to choose to pursue your research field you're currently in, and maybe was that the right choice for you? And what did you do your undergrad in? Actually, I don't know.
Well, I was actually a Latin and Greek major in college.
Nice.
And that was a very, very simple decision for me because I had taken 4 years of Latin in high school, and I was able to place into junior level Latin when I went to college. And I knew I was not very good at literary analysis and literary critiquing. So that allowed me to jump over a lot of those language requirements by going into Latin. And then I kind of enjoyed it. I got good grades in it. There weren't very many. And it was kind of unusual to have, I knew I wanted to go to medical school. It was very unusual to have a pre-med who was a Latin major. So I got into a really good medical school, and at a school some of you may have heard of, Washington University in St. Louis, which is where I also went to. And I see somebody, Canyon Locke, is a Latin major too. Good for you, pal. And I went to medical school there. And then I was recruited to come to the Rocky Mountain Labs after that. I sort of fell in love with infectious disease and virus infections. And after that, every time I had a career choice, I just did what was the easiest thing. And here I am. Yeah.
That is fascinating. I really like it. Somebody said here that you should come to their school to speak and teach them about these principles. So maybe you can follow up on that after this. And another student here is if you can see that here in the chat, that he's a Latin major too, and he's considering UM. So that is all great. I very much want to thank you for your time and the effort you put into this presentation. I think we all learned a lot, and I think it was very important for the negotiations today and for our personal choices the next couple of months to come. So please join me, everybody, in thanking Dr. Bloom here for giving this great presentation. And you can clap digitally here, and maybe if you have video on, you can do that too. But thank you so much.
Well, I want to clap for all of you too. And I mean, what you're doing today is extremely important, and I'm extremely impressed. So I'm going to sign off now so you can do what you're supposed to do, and wish you all the best of luck. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marshall.
Terrific. Thank you, Marshall. I echo the statements from Professor Maggi. So with that, I now call the 2020 Montana Model United Nations High School Conference to order. I will accept a motion to suspend the meeting so that delegates may move to committee. To do so, please go to the Participants tab on Zoom and raise your hand to make a motion. I will then call on your country to give a motion to suspend the meeting so that delegates may move to committee. And look at the Participants tab. All right. United Kingdom, to what point do you rise? United Kingdom, to what point do you rise?
I rise to suspend the meeting.
All right. There's been a motion to suspend the meeting delegates. Please stay on the participants tab to vote on this motion. All those in favor vote yes, and all those opposed vote no. And all those abstaining, just raise your hand. Wait a couple more moments for a few more folks to get their votes in. All right, so this motion overwhelmingly passes. So at this time, please proceed to Gatherly. Each student received an emailed link to their school email address with how to access Gatherly. If you're having any problems finding that email, please contact Professor Adams at karen.adams@umontana.edu. I'll put her email in the chat. Please also exit out of Zoom before entering Gatherly to avoid any technical issues. So at this point, MMUN is now suspended so that all delegates may proceed to committee for the first session. Thank you, delegates, and see you all on Gatherly.
Professor Adams.